Well, it's gone quiet tonight without my having to bang the table. I hope that's peaceful. Welcome, everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to see a really, really full room on the time when there might have been people who were less than willing to come. So it's absolutely brilliant to see you all. And John here is going to tell us who you are, where you are, and what you are. Please.
Well, members and fellows, I'm very pleased to say we have 59 members and fellows here tonight. Now, sometimes we have more, but it's very rare that we see this room so full. So that's obviously a testament to the fact that lots of people wanted to stay and hear what Grace has got to say. In addition to 59 members and fellows, we have 9 guests, and our 9 guests include Grace's son, who has come all the way from the Netherlands. Where are we? There you are. And amongst our members and guests, we have Alex Heyman, who has come from the USA. So a little round of applause for them, please. We have one member who's on her first visit, and she's very unprepared for this. It's Judith Webb, who's literally just walked in the door. So stand up again, Judith. Judith is one of our new members making her first visit. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, the fire notice is in the event of an emergency, out the front door, turn right and gather in the courtyard. You can't use the lift, it's not working, so just make your way downstairs and that will be fine. Thank you.
Thank you, John, very much indeed, and welcome to all of you. Tonight, Grace Davies has come to show us her wonderful material downstairs and to give us a talk about peace, a subject which I'm sure is extremely close to her heart and very much ought to be close to all our hearts. I met Grace quite a long time ago, I think, because we have the honor of living in the finest county in the country, of course, which is West Sussex. Although I think actually she lives in East Sussex, but there you are, I can't help that. That was some bureaucrat who divided the great county of Sussex into 2 and thereby created enormous problems. It's a little bit like Michigan, you know, it has 2 bits with a lake in the middle or between. However, Grace has been dedicated to this subject for very many years, and I have seen a lot of her material over various times. She's shown it very widely to a lot of local societies, and indeed many not very local, because I know you've spent time traveling around the country, showing it to lots of people and staying over and doing things like that, and adding a huge amount to the story of the subject, but also to philately in general. And I won't ramble on any further. I will just welcome Grace. Thank you very much indeed. Would you please give us your 5 o'clock talk?
Well, good afternoon, good evening, whichever it is, ladies and gentlemen, members and fellows, guests. I'm feeling a bit emotional suddenly because we have guests also from overseas and our president even. I wouldn't like to say how many hours they were spent on the internet, but if anyone wants any information about testing between Heathrow, London and Brighton, we have experts in the room. Okay, well, yes, this is an unusual collection. Before I say anything more though, I want to say hello to a couple of people who are on Zoom who I know are watching now. One is Tim in the West Country and one is Andres Schlichter in Argentina, and I see he is on screen. And it just makes us realize how now with technology, we have such a big global reach. And my collection really has a global reach because, as Peter said, the subject peace or the absence of peace is probably relevant all around the world. And what I want to just say now, because this does come up, is this is not a political treatise. This is not a philosophical treatise. This is a collection, a philatelic collection. And I want to show you what I've built up, and you've seen it downstairs, around the subject and how it can be done on an abstract subject, how it can be done on anything really. So yes, it's unusual, but when I worked out the structure, when I first started to display to clubs, what I produced was something quite traditional, actually. So I start, as you would expect, with peace, not as the opposite of war, but after war. So let's see what we have. The Boer War. There's not much material, no stamps as far as I know, but there are a few interesting items on the frame. After World War I, of course, there is more. Not a lot, but there are more stamps. My favorite is the Japan issue, which you can see downstairs. After World War II, there's a lot of material. Lots of post offices were issuing stamps. But before we go to that, I just wanted to show you this because I think it's adorable. And if you see it, it's written on the 7th of May. And as you know, that's the day before Victory in Europe Day. Switzerland was ready, and on the 9th issued its beautiful peace set. Now, as you see in number 4, at that point, Japan was still in the war. It was forced to surrender in August after the dropping of the atomic bombs. And on 2nd of September, we have the signing of the official surrender, the end of the war, VJ Day, the end of the World War, and then a whole tranche of new material arrived. I've chosen to show you this New Zealand set because I like it. It's quite important to me, but also because of my interest in art. And you might have noticed downstairs a beautiful pencil drawing by James Berry. Now, a lot of you have probably seen or have in your collections preliminary artwork. So I want to show you something else. This is the artistic equivalent, isn't it, of brainstorming on the old flip charts. You can imagine James Berry with his bit of tracing paper. Do we do it horizontal or vertical? He's a very experienced stamp designer. And here we see the very beginning. And I think to see it side by side with the finished stamps, which, let's face it, are very fine indeed, is quite something. Well, after wars, there's a lot of work to be done. And most of that takes place in peace conferences. If they're successful, they conclude with a treaty, but believe me, lots of them don't. And not all treaties hold either. But some of them do, and perhaps the most well-known for us is the Versailles Treaty. I chose this postcards because it does actually have the German cachet at the bottom, and I feel it's important to include the German delegation. It's sent to Mary Cools, who was head of Reuters in Paris, and it's peace at last, she says. That is the day of the treaty. And of course, I will come back to it, but the main importance of that treaty is that out of it came the League of Nations. Well, there were quite a few, after Versailles, there were quite a few conferences before all the borders could be settled and finished with the 1923 Treaty of Lausanne. And there was a similar situation after World War II for different reasons. So here we have the 1946-7 conference and treaty, but after that, there's still what about Japan? So in 1951, there's the San Francisco Conference and Treaty, in which Japan was recognized as an imperial power, but China wasn't there. So there has to be another one, which is the Asia and Pacific Ocean Treaty between Japan and China, and I believe about 41 other countries. Now, when I reflected on some of these events and people's attempts to prevent war and failing and all of that, I decided to put some of these thoughts into an exhibit. I'm not a great exhibitor. This is probably my best one. It did get gold at Stampex. In fact, maybe even Berta gave me the gold. I can't remember, but I did. It's probably my best exhibit, and it is the most serious. And it tells, if you like, the story of those events, not the organizations. And you'll see at the end of the introductory paragraph, it says a story of optimism and failure. Well, an exhibit is limited in what it can show, and I felt in a collection like this, I need to give a bit of space to the peace movement. So I think I've given a whole frame to the peace movement. Switzerland, there's not many stamps for the peace movement. It's a difficult area to collect. There's labels, but Switzerland is so reliable in producing material. So the peace movement is formed of lots of little groups which grow together and get bigger and become national, and then they met in different parts of the world as universal peace congresses. And when it was meeting in Geneva in 1912, Switzerland produced this postal stationery card. And when it was coming back in 26, the post office overprinted the card on the back with the 26 date. Neither is a copy, they're two separate postcards, and the bottom one is quite busy. And I managed to get a mint copy of that label because it's quite nice. You see the sun with the rising sun with Pax Peace in the center, and the legend, if you like, translated, says utopia is the dream of today and the reality of tomorrow. And if you think about it, my sisters probably will agree, thinking of our father, if you're going to be a pacifist, if you're going to be an idealist, you probably have to be an optimist. Anyway, the peace movement was not unable, even with the development of the International Peace Bureau Bern, which was awarded the Peace Prize in 1910, it was not able to prevent World War I. So during the war, Woodrow Wilson and his colleagues were working out their famous 14 points, one of which was accepted, and that was the founding of the League of Nations. Sadly, the League of Nations was a failure. Its 1932 disarmament conference failed, and here in 1943, we have Robert Cecil, who you might have seen the frame about the League of Nations Union downstairs, but Robert Cecil, who led the trustees, writing to Lord Harlech, basically regretting the failure of the League of Nations and asking for public support for the new policy, which was, of course, the United Nations. This stamp, and anybody who wonders will know why I get cross when people will add an S. That's why it's toward, not towards. This stamp was issued the 25th of April, 1945, which was the first day of the first meeting of the new United Nations. Its purpose was to draw up the charter, and which it completed in June. And I think, if I may, Mr. President, I should have time. I just would like to read you the preamble, because it's like the mission statement, and it's still relevant today, and we hear quite a lot about the United Nations. So this is just the preamble. We, the people of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. And for these ends, to practice tolerance and live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure, by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods, that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples. We have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. It's quite one hell of a brief, isn't it, really? Now, I don't collect the United Nations per se. The UNPA produces masses of material, and I just collect either what is particularly relevant or important or what I like. And when I discovered that the first meeting of the new General Assembly was held in London in Central Hall, I was sort of intrigued. I latched onto that. And so you can see downstairs all the venues for the General Assembly until the New York headquarters opened. Lake Success was used quite a lot, and they established a post office there very quickly. But I like the airmail letter, which is from an Indian district forest officer writing for a job. And he sets out his merits, which include a good knowledge of the world. And I sometimes think, if I think about it, I wonder if he got the job. And of course, there was a whole resource for people all around the world. Now, if we move away from war and politicians, at least for a direct link, what I discovered along the way is there's masses of material, mostly stamps, linking peace with other ideas. So here's a couple of examples. We have the Gibraltar Peace and Freedom issue. That was part of the Europa series 50 years after the end of the World War. I have all the artwork. This is artwork by Jennifer Toombs. And the other example is Peace and Justice. In 1880, St. Vincent started to include in their sets, they don't form complete sets, the seal of the colony, where we have the allegorical figures of peace and justice at an altar. And you see I've dedicated a whole frame to that because I get these urges to collect whole sets. Now the allegorical figure is interesting. And most of those issues link either to a time of anxiety like 1932 in Europe, or here this is an optimistic during a short republic. But what I will point out is that the allegorical figure of peace is always female. She always holds an olive branch. She sometimes also, but never only, holds a dove, as here. And you're free to correct me afterwards and say, I know one holding a dove. But anyway, that's as I see it. Now, I have to really, in the subject on peace, focus a bit more on the symbols of peace. And this is another one of my exhibits. It's a two-frame one, probably tells you everything you need to know about the dove and the olive branch. And during it, I've developed my theories about the dove, of course, is a symbol of peace, but primarily it is a carrier of our hopes, of all sorts of our post, our news, and peace. It's the olive branch that is the true symbol of peace. But the dove is important, and I do set out in there the role of Noah and of Picasso in making the dove a symbol of peace. And Picasso is particularly important because in philately, because this beautiful painting is copied a lot in stamps and postmarks and other drawings of his, and others that are similar to that, in which Sandy Gibbon will say after Picasso. So that's one of my favorite items, that postcard. It's an original postcard from the Peace Conference. The peace rose is also a symbol. I mean, there are other symbols, the open hand, the rainbow, the bells of peace, peace bells. This is a symbol because, having been bred in France in the 30s, a piece of budwood was sent to America for safekeeping. Trial there was a triumph, and after the war was given a special name-giving ceremony with an actress releasing doves and all that stuff, was named Peace for man's greatest desire. Really, it was then a wonderful rose, but it was in the right place at the right time. But it wasn't a flash in the pan, because 50 years later, when everyone is commemorating 50 years since the end of the war, garden centres and parks were suddenly stuffed with peace roses. This label I got from my local garden centre, probably scarce, could be rare, might even be unique. I couldn't get another one 2 years later, but you can see how it was marketed. Peace, the world's most famous rose, the world's greatest desire, peace. That's how it was still being marketed in 1995. So that's the exhibit. Now, the peace rose was also in my collection as a name, just one page, the name of the rose. And Peace as a Name is a terrifically fun collection, and such surprises came up, you know, the Pax airship and La Paz on the top of Bolivia and things. And the hotels are really great to collect. They're normally quite luxurious. There's a postcard of the Hotel in Lugano in which somebody's written, "This hotel is real posh, hot and cold in all rooms is absolutely gorgeous. But I've chosen to show you this one, the Grand Hotel in Apache. Margaret, my sister, and I've been there, but really because of this cover, which came on the Queen Mary, looking for following Mr. Nobel, care of American Express, to Salzburg, Brindisi, and found him in Montecatini, Terme. That's the grand tour, isn't it? And in 1922, probably the beginning of, but he would have been rich, and the hotels were catering to these rich travelers who've got the railways now and can afford to come to Europe. But not all these hotels were big. Some were quite plain. And here is an enigma. This is very rural. I think you can see clearly enough that the hotel is on the front, but the name's been whitewashed over. But it's on the side, Hotel de la Paix, and not a new replacement. People are posing, if not in their Sunday best, but they're not in their work clothes. They're posing. There is something happening there. It's 1903. I wrote to Lionel and I never heard back, and I need to really try again. But if there's anyone here who can enlighten me, please see me afterwards. Another collection of stamps for Peace as a name is Tiananmen. Okay, I just was interested in the stamps. But what I love about this postcard, which I was thrilled to find, is I imagine the square as very grey, whether it's tarmac or stone, with soldiers marching. It's been the venue for, forget about the massacre, it's been the venue for all of the China's big events for many years. And here we see it as a place of recreation, young trees, the horse and cart, and some of those carts look like racing ones, and certainly the square's big enough for racing. We can date it because it's not likely to be 14th century, this postcard, is it? So it's got to be within 28 and 49 because of the name. Now, miscellaneous is what it says. They're items that I either have chosen not, they don't have a section to go into, or I've chosen not to put them into, like this with its dove, but I want it to stand on its own. I think those of you who like to go and have a look before, another quick look before they go for their glass of wine, this may be, if you haven't seen it, the frame to look at, because the items in it, they're either, to my view, very interesting or scarce or probably rare, or maybe like this unique, because this is genuine and I have the royal certificate. This is a genuine North Korean artwork. It's not one of those things done after the stamp's been issued. So that's it, but it's a mixture, and do look at the Peace Jubilee page in there because it's just fun. Now, I gave space also in that frame at the bottom to two of the people that there are a few who I feel should be in a collection on peace but didn't get the Nobel Peace Prize. So hold on to your seats. Has anybody been to Madrid and seen it? Two of you. It's very powerful, isn't it? Is it about, I think it's about 12 foot. It's so, if you're ever in Madrid, it is so overwhelming. It is so magnificent. And that's as big as I can make it here, but that's not bad for size, is it? And if you're thinking, yeah, but that's about war, not peace, it's actually an anti-war painting. And from what we know about Picasso and the doves and his attitudes, it's an anti-war painting, and I want Picasso in my exhibit, in my collection. And the other person is Gandhi, who I thought this is the morning cover, but somebody pointed out to me today that it might be a first day cover. Gandhi probably would have got the Nobel Peace Prize. He was nominated, but he was, if he hadn't been assassinated. And so in terms of the story of Gandhi, I was very happy to find this morning cover. But I can't spend the time explaining about the dates, but they are relevant, and this could be also, yeah, okay. So we have Gandhi, and if anybody who's looking and hasn't seen below, I do have the two sets, the sets with the pink high value stamp. And the final section is Nobel and the laureates. Of course, my interest is in the Peace Prize, but there's no point doing any of this if I don't give some background to Nobel. What he was like, how he got his money, how he came to leave money for the prize. And here we have a one-frame exhibit, which is not about the Peace Prize. It is about that. And it finishes with all the laureates of 1901. But I just want to flash this on the screen. You don't need to try and read it. It's in the back of the brochure. But this is his will. And nobody ever talks about Nobel's will, but that's the key to it. That's where all the money comes. And just look at it. He did it without solicitors. He just wrote down what he wanted. And as I say, you can read it afterwards, but I will just point out the top highlighting bit. It'll be given annually to those who, during the preceding year, shall have conferred the most benefit. It took me a long time to connect with that, but if you do, a lot will fall into place. You know, why did Obama get it after only 8 months in presidency? Why hasn't it been taken away from Aung San Suu Kyi? Why did Kissinger, and, you know, there's a lot of questions that fall into place. It is not a guarantee for the future. How can it be? You know, if you think of the Literature Prize, somebody gets it for writing a wonderful book. There's no guarantee they'll write another one. So it's very important when you look at the laureates to realize the award is for what they did during the preceding year. And now just a quick flash. I've promised to give a few specifics about the Peace Prize. And the first one is that it's the most controversial, of course. And you wouldn't believe it, but it starts in 1901 with controversy. Dunant was getting the prize for the founding of the Red Cross, very worthy, you might say. But other people said, the Red Cross does not promote peace, rather it humanizes the face of war. There you go. I should think the committee wished they'd never taken it on, but because Nobel just said, he didn't ask anybody before he died whether they'd do it. But anyway, they got round it by his sharing the prize with Frederick Passy, who was a bona fide peace activist. And up to the First World War, most of the laureates were pacifists, peace workers, peace organizations. Not all, but most of them. When we get to World War I, the prizes are suspended other than to the International Committee of the Red Cross. And here's another point, which some of you will know, I'm sure, but the Peace Prize is the only one that can be awarded to organizations. The others can only be awarded to individuals. The role of the committee here was to look after prisoners of war according to the Geneva Conventions. And the workload was such that it couldn't manage on its own. So it shared the workload with the Danish Red Cross, which looked after the Eastern Front, which is why it has those rather nice Russian postmarks. And the same thing happened in the Second World War. There was only the award to the International Committee. Well, after the war, the committee has to think the peace movement couldn't prevent war and turned its mind more to politicians. And the example I give here, because there's so little of Great Britain in my collection, is our own Austen Chamberlain, who was awarded the prize for his role in the Locarno Conference. The treaty was signed in Whitehall, and that's why it had, just as a passing note, there is the Locarno Room. You can see here the difficulty that I've sometimes had in finding material to illustrate Peace Laureates. I have to use what I can, but that is, apart from the postcard, that is his Chamberlain's signature. After the war, there is a change, but here's one more politician, because in 1950 it went to Ralph Bunche, who was passionate about the success of the United Nations, but also for his negotiations in Israel and Palestine. But this has got to be unique because this is the envelope that took the notification to him that he had been awarded the Peace Prize from the Nobel Committee. There's their seals. And what is a real treat to any collector, it came with this authentication by Bunche's secretary's sister, written in '89. So that's not only 40 years after his award, but it's 20 years after he died. So you can speculate as well as I how that works out. But now we see a change. And if you think back to the frame on peace associated with other ideas, they're mostly after the Second World War, that material, and the comments in the United Nations preamble about better life and social freedoms. There's a realization that one has to improve conditions for peace. Peace workers can't do it themselves. The politicians can't. And if we just look at the news, you can absolutely see, can't you, how relevant that is. So there's 3 examples before I finish. There were the stamps, Food for Peace. Well, Norman Borlaug was a highly respected geneticist and plant pathologist working in Mexico, who bred strains of wheat which were more prolific and disease resistant to feed the hungry of the world. There's one. The next one, well, in 2006, when Al Gore produced his film An Inconvenient Truth, a lot of people jeered at him and at the scientists that supported him, but not everybody, because the next year he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for informing the world of the dangers of climate change. And it's not exactly an aside, but when I was finishing this brochure, COP26 was starting. And on the news, twice, I saw Al Gore. And I thought, this is a moment in history. And I'm producing a brochure, which David Beach says has got to be for the future, not just for today. I have to make a historical note. So if you wonder, that is why there is a whole page devoted to Al Gore. It's sort of fixing that point in history, because I felt that was important. And it's very topical. And finally, young Malala Yousafzai, the youngest laureate ever, also very topical because of what's happening in Afghanistan. And she was shot and, as you know, nearly died for her campaigning for education for children. And I could stop there, but I would like to finish and give the last word to one other person. And this is John Hume, who in 1998 shared the prize with David Trimble for their efforts for a peaceful solution in Northern Ireland. I wrote to them both. I had signed photographs back, and John Hume sent me this letter in which he says, I was obviously very honored to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, and I saw it not just as an award to myself, but as a strong statement of international support for the peace process, and of course, sympathy for the people of Northern Ireland, particularly since it comes from such an internationally respected body as the Nobel Institute. And as I can't put it better myself, I will stop there. Thank you.
That was terrific, quite extraordinary. And I don't know what you've done all your life. I ought to have looked it up and worked it out. But your ability to speak for 40 minutes without a note, without a dais, without anything but your wonderful personality is a great joy to us all. David Beach has very kindly agreed to give a vote of thanks, and I would like you, David, to do that now, please.
Well, Mr. President, fellows, members and guests, Grace, I think we've had quite a remarkable presentation this evening. In fact, I think this is one of the most remarkable presentations that I've ever been to at the Royal. It's been delivered with panache and style and great knowledge and great eloquence. There wasn't a stutter in it at all. It was really, really excellent. But this comes of having a passion for one subject. This comes for knowing one subject. And if you can speak for 40 minutes without a note, then you have that passion. And I remember that in my professional life as a curator, you could always tell a good curator, a good collector, a good anything, they have passion. And if they have the passion, it speaks to us all. And that's what we've had this evening. So congratulations, Grace, you've had a wonderful triumph. Now, many people were wondering why it's me that's giving this vote of thanks, because I'm not a thematic philatelist. In fact, I spent all of my philatelic career and life in trying to work out what makes thematics so important and work. And So therefore, to me, that's almost a new subject. It represents a challenge. So if I have some ignorance, I try to do something about it. I don't think I necessarily know more about why thematic collectors collect in such a way, but they do. But they all do with great passion, and passion is so important. The display itself has wonderful range of material in excellent condition, beautifully written up, and from just about every part of the world. Well, every part of the world has had a war, and every part of the world has had peace that follows. I was particularly pleased to see that Grace has included a history of her collection, how it came about, where she exhibited, how she formed it. And not many people do that. And I think that adds to the record of the day. It'll be the sort of document, and Grace alluded to it in her talk, where in 50 years' time, and they want to know about what happened and how this was formed, this will be the document that people will refer to because it's written at the time. I was particularly pleased to see a lot of emphasis on people. I suppose if people start war, they start peace. And this was well shown, and I'm very pleased that you did that too. It is, of course, a never-ending subject. There will always be wars, unfortunately. Let's hope there's less of them, but there's certainly peace that follows. So I'd just like to thank Grace and say she's been entertaining, informative, erudite, and I'd like to just to join together in thanking her in the usual way.
I think I ought to have invited questions before, but thank you very much indeed, David. So I'm very happy to invite questions now, and I'm sure Grace will do her best to answer them. So, yes.
Grace, is this one on, please? Thank you. Yes, just wait while the microphone comes. Who am I taking this to? Alex.
Alex.
It's never a good idea to give David Beach the last word, so I like questions after his vote of thanks. Grace, this was wonderful, and I'm so very happy to have come over for it. My passion's also in it with the thematic area. I'm curious, you showed the Peace Rose, a tag from your local nursery. Is that your, I realize with all one's children, it's hard to pick a favorite, but if you had to point to the piece of ephemera, the non-philatelic pieces in your display, which connects the most, which do you feel gives the most context to what you're trying to achieve?
What a question. Oh boy, I mean, I love that piece label, but there's other ephemera. And I don't know how long we have. Would you like me to go through all the ephemera? I don't know if I have a favorite. I'm not going to say the letter that it's a good item, but that's sad. I do love the letter from the London office of the Peace Society. I'll go for that. Because if you notice, it's written to a local branch. In fact, it's Leeds, so we have to watch Yvonne and Richard that they don't go home with it. But it's written to the Leeds Society in the elegant language. It's 1842 or something, isn't it? Expressing regret that they haven't paid up their £1.17 and sixpence. And you know, that could be ABPS, couldn't it? Writing to a federation saying you haven't paid the fees. So I'll go for that. I think ephemera can be lovely, yes.
Some other questions. We're all absolutely bowled over.
Oh, Alex got.
Alex, you've got another question. Right, you are.
One follow-up.
Well, he's come a long way. Allow him.
You get as many as you like.
It's a very quiet British crowd here today. The next question is not to ask what is next, but I'm curious, what is the challenge that you're seeking next, whether with this theme within thematic collecting of peace, or what is the next project? I'm fascinated by the passion and the focus over such a long period and the many different ways you've woven in all the pieces that touch peace. So is there another area still to come? Yeah, please.
Well, I've been very strict all the way along that I stay within Peace. It's all under the umbrella of Peace. But an interesting conversation started at the last meeting. And if anyone helps, I would love to be able to represent the Antarctic, which has never had a war. And we know the Antarctic Peace Treaty said the Antarctic shall be used for peaceful purposes only. And I had a conversation with Anthony today about this. I don't know if there's any philatelic material at all. I'll accept a draft of the peace treaty. I will accept any ephemera, but that is an area I would love to find. And actually somebody today said, did I have anything on Quakers? I do in terms of the 1947 Nobel Peace Award, but maybe I should develop that and have a section on conscientious objectors. The Quakers, maybe I should develop that. That enough at my age? I haven't got that long.
You're always collecting your list.
Oh, right.
Well, thank you very much. If I may give you one suggestion. One of the prizes was given to Al Gore, I think, or no, a previous man, who was working on the breeding of wheat.
Norman Borlaug.
Norman Borlaug.
Yes.
And I've been reading on the aeroplanes going to and from the States this last week, a book by a man called Linus.
Linus Pauling.
No, Michael Linus, I think,
Oh.
About GM and about GM crops and about the paranoia which was developed as a result of young people in this country. Mm-hmm. And the book is actually an apology for the fact that this man spent his youth cutting down maize, and he is now totally in agreement with the scientists who think it's the only way we can ever feed the world. Mm. So maybe that's something that you could develop, because it's a pretty big subject.
So I'm glad I included him.
There you are. I'm glad too, because I find it quite fascinating. Okay, well, now it is my duty and a very great honor to present you with your certificate.
Thank you.
And with this, which is, I think, one of the great pieces of ephemera that we can find. And it says, Grace Davies, 5 p.m., 2nd of December, 2021. So there you are.
Thank you very much.
Hearty congratulations.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, and I just want to say how delighted that not only that my son is here and Alex is here, but that Peter is here, because a few days ago we didn't know whether they would manage the testing. So it's lovely that you're here, Peter.
Thank you.
To chair at the meeting.
Thank you.